When is the next one, you know?
Right.
So you're just talking about, you're gonna do something.
Yeah,
maybe you're
yeah.
ribbon cutting event
Yeah, nice for the canoe launch.
Yeah.
That would be nice.
Well, likely they probably
We
just
could
didn't
do
want them back
fall,
either.
too.
There's not a lot they can do with them.
It's just the water has to be lower.
Yeah.
If it's rain.
Had that happen with an order, we ordered a bathroom mirror. It's like, you know, it's huge. And it shows up and it's completely shattered. They say.
Okay, we could start up again. If everyone could make sure your microphones are on.
Wait, let me get this on.
Okay. Actually, our director requested another minute, so I'll.
We need Jeopardy music.
Maybe George plays music.
There you go. I asked for walkout music.
Okay, the hour being 6:56 PM on Monday, January 24th, 2022, I'd like to call to order the Committee of the Whole meeting of the Village Board. Bridget, can we have a roll call, please?
Trustee Cote?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Conroy?
Here.
Trustee Leclerc?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny?
Here.
And President Garvey.
Here. Thank you, Bridget. First item, this is a follow-up on a previous discussion regarding the Azavar Professional Services Agreement, proposed agreement. Tim, Tim or Doug want to take a lead on this?
I think Doug will.
Again, we have a memo from our packet, kind of summarizing the previous discussion that we had about this, and the board had raised numerous questions at the previous meeting, and some of those were addressed in the memo, but I think Doug, and Doug Cooper, our finance director, is presenting to the board now, so thank you, Doug.
Oh, you're welcome. So just as a review, we did bring this item to the Committee of the Whole on November 22nd. As a reminder, what Azavar does is they would go out and they would review our certain revenue streams that we agreed to and find if there's any missing revenue that we have been not taking advantage of. They would do this solely on a commission-type basis. They would charge us no upfront fees. We would supply the request, after our discussions with Azavar and their procedures, we would supply, as staff, we would supply them with the information that they ask for, and they would apply their procedures, whatever they are, to this database and come up with some suggestions or recommendations, or if they found revenues, they would talk to us about that. We would have to sit down with them, and then we would go over those findings to determine where we want to proceed as a village. We would most likely start using doing a review of the utility taxes, natural gas and electric. And like I said before, the Azavar's fee would only be monies that a commission that they received on found revenues. Okay, so to address the board questions, there were several questions, and I'm going to go through the list here real quick. One of the questions asked, I believe Trustee Ketchmark brought this up, he believed that the 45% may have been a little bit too high ask. And so I talked to Azavar, and they are willing to drop that percentage down to 40%. That would be in the contract. We would change that number for approval should the board decide to go ahead with it. I don't know if it was Trustee Kaluzny about the retro.
I missed that meeting. so it
Trustee
wasn't
Hendricks,
me.
I'm sorry. She had asked about the retroactive. It is a look-back period of 3 years. According to our village code, we can go back 3 years on unpaid revenues. And anything that is found by Azavar, particularly as it concerns utility taxes for natural gas or electric, that would be addressed with the company itself. It would not come out of the resident's pocket because that's just the way that it works. They have money, and they would be the ones that would be paying the outstanding liability. We would address and work with the utility company to get that money back. It would not go back to the resident.
Is it likely that the utility company would then back charge the resident?
No, I don't think that is going to happen. I don't
Okay.
think they are allowed to do that. Tom Fagan from Azavar is behind me, and he can respond to that question. I was just going to go through the rest of these real quick, and then he can come
Of
up
course.
and respond to some other questions you guys might have. Okay, so let's see, the next item on there was there was a Schedule B on the contract that talked about what we would be auditing. We would pick and choose, we could go through those prior to any work being done, and we would work with Azavar to make that determination. Particularly would be for sure would be the utility audits for the gas and electric. Some franchise fee audits mentioned and some other items, but that would be a decision that staff would make and work with Azavar in doing that. It wouldn't be Azavar's total decision. Staff would have input on that. Okay, are there other firms that provide this type of work? There are, as far as I know, there are no firms that specialize in this type of audit procedure. There was a company out there, it was called Audit. I located them through some research I was doing, but they no longer exist. Last I saw, they did some work for the Village of Hoffman Estates, and that might have been in 2016, somewhere in there. I did a Google search on them, and I did not find them. They had a Facebook page, but I could not access it. So I discussed it with Mr. Fagan, and he said they no longer are in business. Otherwise, the other firms that would do this type of work would be CPA firms or auditing firms. They would probably charge what's called a fixed fee, so you would get charged up front for any work procedures that they would do. I used to work at an auditing firm, and we did what was called a franchise audit fee, and that was how we structured the arrangement, was we billed the client for work performed. I don't remember the pricing on that, but we billed them up front plus expenses, but we let them keep all the money, I believe, at the end of the day. But auditing firms are another source that I could go to. That would not be, I can't guarantee that they would respond to it, but it's always something that they might be interested in. Also, Azavar is, when you think about doing an audit revenue, in my circles in the IGFOA and all of the finance directors, the first name that always pops up is Azavar. Just they have a big presence out there. They have over 250 clients in the Chicago area. In this area, they've done work for Summit, Lyons, Stickney, Melrose Park, Western Springs. They also just finished some work up with Burr Ridge. And they also do some of the larger companies. They did Evanston, Woodridge, Addison, Normal, and Springfield were some of their other clients. But they do have a base of, they have a very large base, and they have a lot of experience. They have 26 employees that focus on this type of work. Each individual employee that works for them is focused on a specific item that they test for. So for that reason, and you know, I guess I never really thought about going out for an RFP or a proposal, only because I didn't even know of any other firms that actually did this type of work, other than what might be considered an auditing firm, similar to who does our financial audit. They might come in, but they would certainly charge us an upfront fixed fee on that. Okay, the last question is a little bit more tougher to handle, but Kit Ketchmark had said, well, if you can do this work, how come we're hiring a firm out there and paying them the 45%? At this point, it would be 40%. And part of the reason, as I discussed before, was they have the expertise. I have a staff of basically me and an accounting manager, and while we might be able to do it, it would certainly take us a longer time to do it. They have everything at their hands. They have all of their database schedules. They have their Excel schedules. And they have the expertise, like I said, of all the individual employees that work for them. It would be much more efficient for the village if they did it. I would like to say that, and I've said this before, this really is not a sprint. It is a marathon, and it does take time to get from point A all the way to the end of the audit. You're looking at, 2 to 3 years from start to finish on doing all of this stuff, just simply because of the amount of data that has to be looked at. So. Okay, so I think I answered all of the concerns and questions from that November 22nd meeting. Do you have any for me, or do you have anything for Tom?
Doug, if I could, because, as the board, I think when the board raised the point about the commission seemed high, I think, I don't know that any of us had any experience that told us it was high, it just seemed high. And in fact, came down to 40%. Hearing that they're basically the only or the best in the area on this, and knowing they did with other towns, what do they charge other towns, the neighboring towns?
It varies, because I did look at that. Like, so for Hoffman Estates, for instance, they charged a sliding scale depending on the type of work they had done. It was 39% for one type, but it went all the way up to 50% for another type where they had to get involved with the utility company. But most of it was 45%. That's what I saw out there for 2 or 3 other audits, was 45%.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the board for Doug at this point?
Was there an average return, I mean, like a percentage return or?
No, it all depends. I mean, I will defer to Tom on that question, but it all depends on what's out there, what's available to look at. It
And this is
varies.
solely commission-based,
It's solely commission-based.
and it can take 3 years, so they're basically saying they're not gonna get anything until like 2 to 3 years, and then,
And once we get that first check from whoever, that's when they start taking their commission.
and this is on monies that we're not already
Right, that we haven't been
getting.
collecting.
We're already not getting this money to
Right.
begin with.
Any other questions of Doug at this point? Okay, is it Mr. Flanagan?
Fagan.
Fagan? Okay, so Mr. Fagan is here to present to the board, or if there's anything you'd like to add, or I could just see if the board has any questions. And again, if I could just remind you to please speak in the microphone. We started streaming these meetings live. and
You got it.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you so much for having me. And to get into a little bit more granular detail, we have proprietary software that's able to take the database, whatever the municipality gives us with GIS or water billing data, taking the Comcast or ComEd data and basically placing it on top of each other and able to find those anomalies. So if an address is miscoded, that Tom Fagan, Brookfield resident, has paid his bill and they don't have it correctly in their database, that money's not coming to Brookfield. So when you think about a residential address, it's usually $2 to $3 a month. And that's what we're splitting percentage-wise. So at the end of the day, we come up with our list of anomalies, and ComEd, Comcast, NICOR, Illinois Department of Revenue, sales tax, they all make mistakes within their databases. We're able to find those anomalies and then also look at franchise fees to your ordinances to make sure that the franchise fees are being calculated correctly. Case in point, Springfield, Illinois, Comcast underreported the gross operating revenue to the tune of $980,000. And we are now starting to get those back tax settlements. Like I was just told today that ALCS, one of our clients, is getting a $12,000 check for back taxes back from Comcast. So that's what we're doing. We're making sure that the gatekeeper is giving you what they should be giving you. And basically you're not dealing with any residents. They are responsible to keep up on annexations. They are responsible to get the address correct. They use USPS postal address, which isn't the most prudent way to find out if it's correctly geocoded. So that's the basis of what we've done for the last 25 years. So that's the ins and outs a little bit of what the audit entails.
So just to clarify, and I think I know the answer already, but
Okay.
we aren't going to be in a situation where John Smith has been undercharged for the last 3 years and ComEd then goes back to that resident and says, now you have to pay all that money back today.
No, they are they're the sole source to be responsible to give, per the ordinance in gross operating revenue terms, to give what they should be giving.
Okay.
If it's 5%, if it's 3%, and so on and so forth.
These companies, so you're gonna take our public resident information that's already attainable because.
We're just taking addresses.
Right, addresses, okay.
I don't wanna know that John
And
Smith
comparing-
lives there.
And comparing it to their customer databases, and they're freely giving you that sensitive information?
Once we sign the non-disclosure agreement and the letter of agency, we're working on behalf of
Okay,
Brookfield
so
to get that
you'll have an
data.
NDA with each company? Whether it be
Correct.
Comcast, Verizon, or whatever.
Correct. And we
Because-
also have attorneys that, on our behalf, Cozen O'Connor out of Washington and Chicago, that work on the back taxes, so we're not using your attorney's time. We're working with you to get settlements from them as well. And that's part of the
And
contingency
where do you
fee.
house this data?
We have it on, we basically have it on our servers that we get. If municipalities want that information back after the audit, we're more than willing to do that.
And do you have like some kind of validation or verification process so that we know that your servers are secure? That our
Yes.
data is sitting on your servers and you're wherever, and I don't know how you keep your data.
Correct. We're PCI and NACHA compliant, so yes, we can do that as well. There was another thought that I had regarding our security, and now we have legislation that got passed in 2020 that we're able to be on the reciprocal agreement for sales tax to help in that sales tax analytics as well. So we're making sure that Illinois Department of Revenue is coding all the businesses for Brookfield and not giving it to LaGrange or a neighboring town. Like Summit, we found that IDOR miscoded 5 addresses to Chicago and not Summit, one of them being a Dunkin' Donuts. And we were able to give that money back to Summit.
So what would you forecast for a community of this size of 20,000 people? What would be your,
So you don't know what you don't know until you dig down into the minutia. So like Assessor Illinois, from all the audits in total, from the payables to the receivables, got like $10,000 back per year. A bigger municipality of 20 or 30,000, they could have coded better, and they've gotten better as the years have gone by, and it wouldn't give as much of a return. We're assuming the risk in the whole process.
okay, and how often do we hear updates on your progress?
That's the other thing, and then to your point, there's a verification memo in each audit that we do that Tim and Doug would get so that they know what we've done for each audit. So billing doesn't start until we know that the money's back in your coffers, and then we take our percentage of what we found. So there's a verification memo that comes along with each audit. Your question though in specific, was that what it was?
Well, that clawback process, how long does that take?
Right.
Once you identify that there's-
Usually the audits, like Doug said, take 18 to 24 months to get through. We might get done with ComEd within 6 months because they were faster getting us the information. NICOR might take 9 months. So in each stream of revenue, we have to give a verification memo to you at the end of each audit to show you what we've done. We do updates and send Doug and Tim 90-day updates. So every quarter, you're knowing where we are with each audit.
And we're mainly focusing on the 5 that are here. I know it says there initially will include the following providers. There's no thought to extend this towards something like, say, places to eating tax of our own local establishments and having them go after.
We've done that for other municipalities too. Like, it would be Tim and Doug to say, we'd like to do the places for eating or food and beverage. We've done those audits as well. So, but we're gonna work together on that. So no audits will start unless they say, let's go.
Trustee Conrad, from a staff perspective, we have not even broached that as a topic, and I wouldn't start a new process without coming back to the board to see if the board was comfortable with doing that or not.
And the village is also going to have an NDA with your company?
Correct.
And in the NDA, could that include your results from the PCI audit?
From the what?
PCI audit?
Yes.
Any part? Okay.
Yes.
Other questions or comments from the board? Okay, thank you very much for coming out tonight. We got the memo from staff, and there's a trustee that's not here tonight. We'll review this. I think we can put it up for a vote in 2 weeks at their next meeting. If anyone that needs more time or questions, please reach out to me or staff. But we'll put this up in 2 weeks.
Thank you so very much for your time. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you for coming out tonight. We appreciate it. Thank you, Doug. The next item is to discuss the surface transportation program applications to be submitted to the Central Regional Council of Mayors. Again, Derek Treichel from Hancock Engineering is here to present to the board tonight.
Good evening. So the Central Region Council of Mayors has a call for project applications every 2 years. I'd like to give a little background. Their last call was March of 2020. We applied for 6 projects, received funding for 4 of those projects. Shields Avenue is one of those, construction. We're scheduled for construction in 2022. Washington Avenue resurfacing was another project. If we're hoping to get contingency funds, we'll find out next couple months if we get those. If we do, that'll happen also in 2022. We received funding for the Ogden Avenue Phase 1 report. The funding is for 2023. And we also received funding for the Burlington Avenue improvements in 2024, and that's for construction. My point being, we did very well with the last group of applications. The other projects we applied for were Brookfield Avenue resurfacing and intersection improvements at 31st and Maple. We did not receive funding for those projects, but we intend to submit those projects again for consideration. The call in 2020 was to fill out their 5-year program from years 2021 through 2025. So that program right now is spoken for. This next call, applications are due March of 2022. That is to fill out their program year from 2026 and 2027. So sat down with staff, we looked at the projects that are eligible are your collector routes, and we get federal funding. It's typically a 70% federal share and a 30% village share. We looked at the various collector routes that we've improved over the years. We have 3 of them are coming up to that 20-year design life for the surface. We went out and looked at the surface, and we think by 2026 and 2027, these 3 routes will be ready to be resurfaced. And just reading from our memo, the 3 routes are Maple Avenue from the railroad tracks north to 31st Street, Prairie Avenue again from the railroad tracks north to 31st Street, and then Washington Avenue from Prairie going east to Gulf. The applications, the cost for us to put the applications together, and the main component of the cost is we have to do a detailed estimate of cost of the construction cost. It's $3,000 per application, so a total of $9,000. If the board approves that, we'll go ahead and put together the estimate of cost and the applications, submit them to the Council of Mayors by March of 2022.
Thank you, Derek. So each of these proposed projects is resurfacing. When they were previously done in 2005, 6, and 8, were they resurfacing? Were each of those just resurfacing, or was there reconstruction back then?
Varies a little. So Maple Avenue was a resurfacing. That was reconstructed in the 80s when the village took over. Prairie Avenue included, that was a reconstruction, I believe, and Washington was a resurfacing.
Okay. So I mean, we're getting 20 years out on those by the time these things come around, so. Okay, questions or comments from the board?
I did have one question about the Washington Avenue, and I'm not sure about Prairie and Maple, but I know there's been some discussion in the past about striping that for a bike lane. So is that something that would be needed to be included in this, like when it got resurfaced, that the potential for striping for bikes, or is that outside the scope of this type of application?
No, absolutely. That would be part of this project, and just as an overall update, so I mentioned that Washington from Prairie running west to Kemen, we're hoping for contingency funds this
Okay.
year. We're working with IDOT to get approval of a bike lane on there, but I anticipate we'll put the bike lane on that section of Washington. We may choose to go ahead and, even though we're not improving from Prairie to Gulf, we may choose to go ahead and just stripe that portion in the interim until the next resurfacing. But just to directly answer your question, yes, striping of bike lanes can be, and I anticipate will be included.
Great, thank you.
And then Derek, the bids that we submitted previously that were not approved, those would also be resubmitted as part of the same package, or no, those are out since they were not approved?
Yeah, those project applications are eligible, but we need to resubmit that, and really it's a matter of updating dates and/or costs on those. The scope of work stays the same, but we do reapply for those projects.
And is there a reason why they lost, or some criteria that they didn't meet that eliminated them, or?
You know, they have a scoring matrix that they go through. Part of it is the condition of the street. Part of it is when they were last improved. So again, our projects rated high. Actually, the 3 projects, the Shields in Washington, and actually Brookfield Avenue was also under consideration for contingency funding. They finished, I think they picked 10 projects. We were projects 11, 12, and 13. So the bad news is we didn't make the 5-year program. The good news is we're the first 3 projects on the contingency list. I will say I've mentioned Shields in Washington for contingency funding. Now it looks like this year. Brookfield Avenue is still eligible. We'll reapply, but there's a chance it gets done before 26 if we can get contingency funding. It just won't be this year because, one, we're not ready because the bridge is still under construction.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, what type of board action are we looking for here? Is it just a consensus, or do we need?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Is there a consensus from the board to move ahead with the Hancock Engineering with the applications for these 3 projects?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Derek, thank you very much. Move forward with them and keep us posted. Thank you very much.
Okay.
And I guess you're going to just stay up here probably for the next item is the discussions of the Grant Avenue widening on the 2022 street improvement project.
Yes, so we are working on the design of the 2022 streets, and one of the streets we're improving is Grant Avenue from Grand Boulevard east to Forest Avenue, so 3 short blocks. We met with staff. We like to discuss, are there any future improvements? You know, typically on our streets, the narrow streets that are 22-foot wide, I think the board's aware, we widened those to 25 feet. So a 3-foot widening, much better access for your garbage trucks, emergency vehicles and whatnot. And when we prepared the preliminary estimate of cost for these streets, that's what we anticipate on Grant, is a 3-foot widening. As we got talking to staff, they mentioned, you know, that's right on the edge of our business district, high demand for parking now, also in the future. We've also observed there is some cut-through traffic that'll, coming down Grand, that sometimes will cut through and go to Prairie, or sometimes all the way to Forest. Not so much now with the bridge out, but when the bridge is in functioning,
I'm guilty of that.
I might have taken that once also too. So just to go over quickly, current width of the street is 22 foot edge to edge. It has a 14.5-foot parkway. Design option A that I listed in our letter was included in our preliminary estimate of cost. That had the 1.5 foot of widening on each side. So that'd go from 22 foot pavement width to 25. And then what we looked at with staff is what would it take to provide dedicated parking lanes, which are typically 7-foot lanes, 7-foot wide, and then also 2 11-foot through lanes. Currently, I want to mention it. So currently, there's parking allowed on both sides, but when cars are on both sides, there's really a shared through lane is what it operates. Currently, there's only 8-foot width left between if there's a car on each side. The proposed option A, there'd be an 11-foot shared through lane. And then design option B, what we proposed is you'd have a 7-foot parking lane on the north, 7-foot parking lane on the south side of the pavement, and then you'd have 2 11-foot dedicated through lanes. Operationally, that'd be a great improvement for Grand Boulevard. However, one of the downsides is it reduces the parkway width from 14.5 feet to 7.5 feet. And we're gonna impact, and by impact mean we're gonna have to remove and more than likely replace 17 trees, which is all of the trees that are out there right now. So we wanted to come before the board and get your input on that. Last thing I listed, the additional cost is about $80,000 for the 7-foot widening on each side.
And just to clarify, Derek, because I think in the course of your explanation on the impact, you said the impact it would have on Grand Boulevard, you meant on Grant Avenue.
Yeah, Grant Avenue.
Okay, because we're talking about the intersection of Grant and Grand, but, so the price tag is approximately $80,000, but there's also a note that there would be some trees that we would lose, and those would not be part of that. And so we're talking about 17 existing trees at $500 per tree that, if we chose to, or we would need to replace, that also we factored. I don't know if all 17 would be replaced or need to be replaced, but obviously we would like to consider that as part of the process and the impact, so.
Yes, so if you replaced them one for one, additional 8,500, so 88,500 would be the total estimate for that with the new tree replacement.
Could I ask, rather than just replacing one for one, could we look at planting them 50 feet on center along the length of the street, something like that, so that we have more coverage, maybe more consistency, rather than just replacing?
Absolutely. I would anticipate if the board approves us going forward, we'd meet with Carl and your forester and then look at spacing. I noted out there when I looked at the trees, some blocks had 5 or 6 trees in a block. There was one I think had either 1 or 0, but yes,
Right.
we'd look at, we're not locked into replacing where they're at, so yes.
Okay.
And with the parking that you're talking about, I'm having trouble visualizing it. Are you talking about like diagonal parking down Grant or just parallel parking, but a dedicated lane of parallel parking?
Right, dedicated lane with
Got it.
parallel parking, correct.
And we lose the trees for either option.
No, you don't lose the trees with the 1.5 foot of widening. We're not impacting the trees, but if we go 7 foot of widening on each side, then we'll lose the trees.
But we would have 2 dedicated lanes and we could replant trees
That's correct.
close to.
It's a
Yes.
difference between one 11-foot shared lane versus 2 11-foot shared lanes with the 2 parking lanes. I mean, that's the trade-off. I mean, it would become, I think the basis of this recommendation coming forward is the close proximity to the business district that we have there and the development that's been going on there. Obviously, there's increased traffic in that area. So, I mean, I was going to say, I appreciate staff and Hancock bringing this forward, because this is an area that we've kind of talked about as kind of pretty popular and heavily traveled and heavily parked and everything else like that. So,
And if I could just add, Trustee Garber, we had this discussion a couple years ago where we were establishing the downtown TIF district. I think the natural growth of downtown is going to be north and east, perhaps along Grant, maybe ultimately to either Prairie or I mean, that's downtown now, but it may grow, and we hope, if things go well, that this natural progression that's where it will go. And so when we were talking to Derek about this, he's right, and we've all seen it, but even right now, when there's cars parked, it's not very inviting for shoppers or for the public, because you do have to do this weave around cars when they're parked on both sides. If and when more development happens and the migration is to the north, this sets us up much better to be able to accommodate easier, safer parking while keeping 2 lanes of traffic there at all times.
and the other point, I'm sure, the consideration of adding the 2 lanes is obviously for better traffic flow and everything else for people using that area, whether there are residents or out-of-town residents patronizing that district and that area. But I'm sure that several of our department heads, including our police department, fire department, and public works department, would appreciate that extra width of being, considering that could be a highly populated area on some nights, the easier access for police and fire vehicles, as well as the Department of Public Works, plowing and getting by there and stuff. It is, we consider the loss of trees very seriously. I would ask that we make sure that we repopulate the trees in appropriate fashion when we're done, if we do go forward with this route. But there's also that consideration of easier access to a highly dense area for police and fire vehicles to get through there, so.
Can I just ask too, like, right now, people can park on both sides of the street, right? So if they wanted to, the same number of parking spaces would exist now as we would if we added the dedicated lanes.
That's
Is-
correct.
Is there a possibility of doing diagonal on one side? And would it add more spaces along those whole 3 blocks? Or, I'm just wondering if it's really getting us more parking for the business district.
Well, if we put the diagonal parking in, there's additional width requirement. I'd have to look at it, but I want to say you're looking at another roughly 7 or 8 feet.
Okay.
You'd be either close to one side, since we only had 7 left over, if you did it all on one side, you'd be close to the sidewalk with the front end of those cars. more than likely, you'd probably center it, so you'd have 2, 3, or 3.5-foot parkways with diagonal parking. So-
But trustee Kaluzny has a point, though, because if we're gonna, if the guess is that that is where the business district will grow, wouldn't it be prudent now to try to increase the parking capabilities of that area?
It'd be great, but, you know,
But I think,
if and when that happens, I mean, the real way you start creating parking is either through parking lots or a parking garage. And we're a long ways away from the latter, but I just, we can look at it, it's a good point. I just don't, from what we've looked at, we just don't have a lot of right of way to be able to do that.
And if I could bring up, good idea, great additional parking for sure. As I'm thinking on the fly, it's pretty unusual in the residential character of that neighborhood. We want to look at that. We have diagonal parking on Grand, makes sense, we have buildings and whatnot there. I'm trying to envision that diagonal parking by the residential areas, because I think that's all residential. I know there's some multifamily, but it's either single or multifamily residential. So something to consider if we go.
no,
that
I think it's a good
direction.
idea, especially after our discussions at the last meeting of reducing parking requirements for larger, I mean, trustee Kaluzny brings a good point. We need to actually absolutely look at increasing that parking if the ability is there. And if we're looking at doing it now is the time to do that.
But I don't think this was brought forward as, it's not being sold as an increase in the number of parking spaces. It's a, you know, improving what's there now with the parking and also allowing for better traffic flow. The result, the current system of having a 7-foot parking line on each side, I mean, I think we've all traveled down that street. It is, and it's a two-way street. Cars can't get by. It's, you know, who has the right of way and who goes through first. This is more to just improve the traffic flow. You know, to Derek's point, I mean, if you look at the character of the neighborhood, there's still those residential, and there's some new residential development in that area. As you go through there, you know, diagonal parking and very small parkways, and cars backing out from diagonal spaces necessarily into the new, you know, the new roadway. I think that goes against the character of the neighborhood as is right now. And I think Tim's point was that if that area continues development, off-street parking or parking lots is probably going to be the addition that's needed. We're not losing any parking here. We're just making better traffic flow with the existing parking that's there. So I just, you know, I'll leave it up to the board in terms if they want to see some type of proposed design or, I mean, I think you, as Derek indicated, just trying to picture turning that into, you know, a Grand Boulevard type thoroughfare. I don't know that that fits the character of that neighborhood in terms of there's residential on both sides and the streets that intersect with it are residential also, so. How does the rest of the board feel?
I mean, my only concern would be, I mean, I'd like to hear what the residents would have to say, because you're kind of encouraging people for the parking, to bring that parking into the residential community where people are leaving the bars and going that way versus heading towards parking along the tracks, if that's the path of least resistance or the least distance to their car. I mean, right now, we still have plenty of parking along the tracks in the evenings once the downtown boulevard gets packed. So I don't know, I mean, if I lived there, I would be opposed to increasing the parking for non-residential use to encourage people leaving the bars to be headed my way rather than headed towards the tracks. But, I mean, also with widening, you also have the water mitigation. I mean, there's nothing, when we do this, there's nothing, when we expand these streets, we have increased runoff. And, I mean, there's nothing to mediate or mitigate that, correct? Like we do with parking lots and.
Yeah, not really. We put flow restrictors on all our drainage structures, but we do that whether we do just 1.5 feet of widening or the 7 foot. So compared to the flows that are going in there existing, the rate of flow through the 8-inch pipe, we're probably, and I say probably, I haven't run the calcs, but we put 4-inch restrictors in there. So we reduce the rate of flow, but there would certainly be more runoff with a wider pavement. So.
And it seems like the parkway on that south side does seem wider than your typical parkway. Is that correct, or no? It might just.
It's about what you have on all the streets with that 22-foot width. So it is wide. It's wider than you see in other towns, but in Brookfield on our older streets that haven't been widened, That's a typical parkway width.
Okay. And if we were to widen it, would we put a stop sign on Prairie at Grant? Because right now, that's a thoroughfare, and it's kind of dicey there. When you stop at Grant and cars are coming down Prairie, they're coming at a pretty good clip. There's very low visibility because cars are parked. And if you're going to make that 2 lanes, I would want to have a 4-way stop there. I would think.
I was going to bring that up as well. Well, I've heard comments recently in the last few months that that's a tough intersection. I've experienced it myself. It's very difficult to see as you're trying to get across Prairie there. I think widening might help that, but I would definitely want to look at what we can do to improve visibility and safety there. I don't know, can we put a stop sign there on Prairie if it's a collector?
We need to meet warrants for that stop sign, especially because it's a collector. I don't believe it would meet it based on current traffic on Grant. If we saw an increase in traffic because of the widening and whatnot, a little easier operational flow, then we could look at it. But we need to meet the warrants, the traffic warrants for a stop sign.
I would definitely then want to look at improving visibility there in whatever way we can.
Something that could be looked at, I've encountered, I think, as you're going, in particular, as an example, as you're going eastbound on Grant and you're ready to cross over. One thing that we could look at, it's how close the cars on Prairie are parked to the intersection. They meet requirements. They need to be 20 feet away from the crosswalks. We can look, because this is a little higher volume intersection, you could look at maybe extending that a little bit so the sight triangle's a little better. So.
That would, I think the board would like that to look
Yeah.
into even if we weren't doing this, the safety in that area in terms of even signage and everything else, or any possible safety improvements in that intersection.
Okay.
And regarding what trustee Conroy brought up, in regards to water mitigation, when that street comes, you're planning on inspecting that sewer system over there just in case. I mean, if the street's coming up and we're going to redo the street, would now be the time to also look at the sewer and that whole range there, just to make sure that doesn't need replacing before if we're going to do all the sewer scoping and everything, wouldn't it be prudent to do the streets that we're getting ready to do first, so we can include it in the project, as opposed to finding out after the road's done that that area needs to be taken a look at, as opposed to, just do it all at once and get it ahead of time?
Yeah, and maybe I wasn't clear earlier. That's exactly why I asked if we were able to award the sewer cleaning and televising. All those sewers will be televised, and we will analyze all those tapes prior to going out for bid. So,
Okay.
yes.
And there was also talk of water supply lines too, right? We were talking about replacing water supply lines throughout the village.
Right, and we intend to, just a quick update, we intend to put in a application for a low-interest loan from the IEPA. We won't see funds from them till 2023 at the earliest. So we will not, as part of this year's project, be replacing the water mains on.
But the water
streets
main
we're
replacement does not necessarily mean you have to rip up the street, because you'll bore underneath it, correct? To run a new line.
Probably
if
go under the
necessary.
sidewalk is,
Okay.
right?
And I think trustee Conroy, the way he phrased the analysis, I think is helpful, in that, that's why I pointed out that I didn't believe this to be a project to increase parking, and I think the board has to think very carefully about incentivizing, creating more parking there, and encouraging the parking from the business district to move that way, when, the thoughts that we've previously had are to utilize the traffic, or the parking along the tracks further away away from the residential area. While I think we're always looking for the opportunity to add parking, I don't know that this is the ideal place to create additional parking at the expense of the residential neighbors in that area, so.
But you do have a section where Grant and Grand meet, that there's not residential along that one section there. I think it's worth taking a look at either way.
Can we, solicit or notify the residents that live on that street by direct mail or contact them directly to make sure that they have the opportunity to weigh in? I know, obviously, this is public, but something that impacts, and this is a pretty significant change that we're talking about, the people that live on that street. That's going to 2 lanes, that's coming from this, it kind of changes the whole dynamic of that street. And I would want the input, the opportunity to, I think we should go a step above and make sure they have been properly notified that this is under consideration and this is their opportunity to weigh in.
I agree.
And I mean, I mean, I guess it's not just the residents on Grant. I mean, you got to look at the intersection streets, you know, Sunnyside and Vernon, and, you know, that would be impacted by this also, at least, you know, that end of the block of Sunnyside and Vernon. And, you know, get some input, or just, I mean, maybe, you know, what's the board's pleasure to just, you know, maybe put this up on the next committee meeting, say we previously discussed it, we're going to discuss this again the next committee meeting, if you'd like to give any input or come to the next meeting and get some input. And, I mean, Derek, we have time to do this. I mean,
We were scheduled to go out for bid February 17th, which would mean to maintain that bid schedule, advertising on the 17th, we would need a decision tonight. But from what I'm hearing from the board, I think we may want to push that back 2 weeks. By the way, that led to a bid award, first meeting in March. If we push it back 2 weeks, we'd still be awarding in March, starting in April, which I think we're early in the year. We meet all the requirements we've wanted to meet in the past, so I would suggest putting it on a committee meeting and discussing again.
Can we do an alternate bid, where you go out to bid with 2 alternates?
You can bid alternates.
Just so you don't slow down the process, and then we go one way or the other.
so what is the request for the alternate bid? Diagonal parking on one side, or?
Yeah, my preference would be to come back, to delay to 2 weeks and get some good input, because I'm not sure I know exactly all the alternates we're talking. I think a little more discussion might be worthwhile.
Well, but, you know, to have, you know, the residents to give meaningful input, I mean, they'd almost need to know what the possible alternatives are. I mean, in terms of, you know, are we talking about diagonal parking on both sides, or one side, or?
I was only thinking on the south side, or, yeah, the south side at the beginning area.
That first block.
Yeah.
But, I mean, again, it was just a suggestion. I don't want to
Yeah.
delay it 2 weeks just for a
That's okay, it's not,
thought.
and, yeah, it's not the end of life here, I think
So
it's a
you're,
good
so,
idea.
so, I mean, just, because maybe we could flesh this out a little bit, so the proposal is, the potential proposal for modification is just diagonal parking on the south side for that first block from Grand to, so it's the corner of
Grand.
Sunnyside, the Pacific Press Building, basically, the condo building to,
Grand of Vernon, I
to
believe.
Yeah.
the
part of
Vernon, to
street.
the
That's
alley,
correct.
there's an alley there, I guess, or where Vernon intersects.
That's correct.
But we're also talking about a single lane versus a dual lane.
Well, I was in favor of the dual lane still either way, right? Or you,
I'm sorry?
I was still in favor of the dual lane, whether or not we do diagonal parking a lot, because I think that it would be necessary to increase the traffic right there. And you would do the dual lane all the way down to Forest, right?
So, and that's what I was saying. Is there anyone that thinks, is there anyone that thinks that we shouldn't widen it to 2 11-foot shared lanes? Or, I mean, I guess if we're getting input, we could get input on that also. But I mean, I thought there was a consensus that the 2 11-foot shared lanes, that the widening to 36 feet was fine. That was one option that the board was considering. Now, the new option was possibly adding diagonal parking to make it even wider at that one part. But is there any thought that we don't want to widen it to the 2 11-foot shared lanes?
I think that is where the residents would want to have their input in, because that's where we lose the trees.
So as a possible way forward, we could put together a option for the widening to 2 11-foot shared lanes, 2 7-foot parallel lanes from Grand all the way to Forest. That'll be one option. Another option we can look at is that same design, but on the south side, from Grand to, it's either that alley or Vernon, we'll look at it, but we'll put some diagonal parking through there. And the third option is just 1.5 feet of widening. And we'll have 3 options to discuss, I guess.
I agree with that.
Is it possible to, I know I'm kind of a sketch, you know, as opposed to just the,
Yes.
you know, the narrative form, just a, you know, even a rough sketch, just so that, you know, possibly see. And then, I mean, I mean, do we get that can we get that to the residents ahead of time, or is that in the board packet for the next meeting? I mean, well, that's, if we do another committee and do direct contact to, you know, the people in that area,
We'll put some exhibits. We'll put an exhibit together for each of the options that we just discussed. I'll get it with Tim. Tim, maybe the route is we can talk tomorrow and strategize.
Yep.
We could have a public meeting with just the residents before the next meeting. Could have them to the committee meeting. Maybe we could talk tomorrow and come up with the best route of communicating with the residents.
Okay. Well, I mean, how does the board feel if staff had I mean, that is another option, having staff solicit input and possibly have a meeting prior to the February 14th meeting?
I'm okay with that.
Me too.
You know, if that's more, you know, or if people want to come out on, I just noticed our next meeting is on Valentine's Day. If they'd like to come out on Valentine's Day and we could discuss there.
That'd be nice. It's a nice invitation for Valentine's Day.
So,
Yeah, well, real good attendance, I'm sure.
well, we'll leave it up. I mean, the idea of getting more input, if staff can reach out and schedule a neighborhood meeting or get input that way, and then we'll put this up again. Either way, I think we need to committee this on the 14th. It's just a question of, do we invite you know, encourage the residents to just come on the 14th, or do you try and set something up before then?
And I think the visual will be helpful for the residents too, to really think about what you're talking about.
I agree.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much, Derek. Appreciate it. The last item up under regular business is consideration of ordinance amending Appendix A entitled Fee Schedule of the Code of Ordinances regarding the increase in video gaming terminal fees. Doug Cooper, our finance director, provided us a memo. This is a new fee increase regarding video gaming terminals that was allowed under state legislation, and there's a proposal from staff. Doug, do you want to summarize where we're at?
Yeah, the governor did sign the bill on December 17th, so it is now law that we can, as a non-home rule community, can increase our video gaming terminal fees from $25, which we have been billing annually, up to $250 per machine. The net overall effect of revenue to the village, and this assumes that the 78 machines on the attached schedule were all billed at that amount, would be $17,550 in additional revenue. The cost to each individual establishment would be $675 net, and that's basically made up of the difference between the $250 and the $25 that we currently charge. Multiply that by the 6 machines, that's just a maximum, because that's the total number of machines an establishment is allowed to have at this point in time. And that equals $1,350. According to state law, those costs have to be split between the gaming operator and the establishment. So there are 2 parties involved here. The gaming operator is the one that actually puts those machines and runs them and operates them and puts them in these establishments, the bars, like Irish Times, or the Cordial. And then there's the establishment itself. The revenue picture is the money comes in, the money is paid out. It results in what's called a net terminal income. That net terminal income is divided up into basically 4 parties. One is the village, we get 5% of that net terminal income. One is the state, they get 29% of that net terminal income. And the difference between that and 100% is 66%, so 33% goes to the establishment and 33% goes to the gaming operator. When we're talking numbers, I mean, in my mind, in my visual, an increase of $675 on the increase that their current, or in the monies that the gaming terminal operators and the establishments are making, I think it's affordable. The slide that's up right now shows what current, and this is Trustee Cote's idea. Thank you very much for making me put this together, because it does show a trend here. So right now, non-home rule communities are allowed to charge $25. Okay, it's now $250, but most of the non-home rule communities are currently charging the $25. The bottom 3, Westchester, Forest Park, and Lyons, I didn't get any answer from any of them as to what they intend on doing. But on the other 3, Darien, they don't intend on increasing this amount until the next budget year of theirs. Roselle, they are going to do it as soon as possible. In North Riverside, they're not going to do it right now because their gaming, their liquor licenses, because you need a liquor license to do gaming, their liquor license fee for gaming operators, where they put them in there, is a $15,000 liquor license fee. So it's already a large enough amount. They felt that they didn't want to increase more monies. The top three, Harvey, Countryside, and Tinley Park, those are all home rule communities, and they can charge what they feel is necessary to charge. And if you look at their pricing, it's $1,000, $750. Tinley Park, they decided to split the cost of those operating, the license renewal fees to a total of $1,350, but split it between the establishment and the gamer. I have some more numbers. I don't know if the board is interested in finding out. There is a chart in the average, and I'll say the average, I read this somewhere, the average gamer, the average gaming machine and establishment makes about $71,000 a year. In Brookfield, we have, of the 14 establishments, there's 10 of them that make above that amount. Some of them are making a lot of money. So I know this might be a concern to some of the board members, if not all of you, that we might be charging another fee on top of some other fees that we have for those businesses, but I think that it's affordable for them. And that's really all I have on this. Are there questions?
Any questions or comments from the board?
I just want to clarify one thing, Doug, because your initial numbers below were the quarterly was quarterly numbers from August to September. I think it says 2021. I think it says 2022. But
Right.
those were quarterly numbers, and above that, you have December numbers, which was just the 1 month, correct?
So, right, so the chart that is in there is just December. There's they call a VGT, a Video Gaming Terminal report that comes off of the Illinois Gaming Board website. And so I put that in there for the month of December because that's the most recent information. And it kind of gives you a feel for, number one, who the establishments are in Brookfield that have machines, as well as the number of machines that they have. And it also shows the monthly income that they can earn. You have to fiddle around with the numbers to come up with it, but it's in there, and I can get those numbers for you if you need them. But the other analysis I did for Kit was, because Kit wanted that schedule in there, I'm sorry, Trustee Ketchmark, forgive me, was based on our last full quarter of information, because the fourth quarter, the December, November, October, November, December quarter has not been finalized by the Illinois Department of Revenue, so I didn't have that number to put in there. So I used the third quarter for that analysis. It gives me 3 quarters of sales tax, home rule, non-home rule tax, and places for eating tax as a comparison to total gaming. So that's why they're kind of different in there. Because I thought with the quarterly, you have a little bit more numbers to work with. You can see a bigger number. It makes more sense.
Okay. And just Stanton Industries, what is that?
That's Phil's.
Phil's, okay.
I don't have a problem with the free increase. I think it's reasonable and makes sense. It doesn't seem like it brings in that much more money to the village, but I was wondering if, with that amount, could it be doing something to better the community, like beautification or parks equipment or the
Yes, you
park
can always,
scholarship fund? I don't know, something that like,
whatever the board would like to do with this additional revenue, you know, we can present some options, or the board can come up with options, and we can always segregate that money. That's not going to be a problem. We did that when I worked at Hinsdale. We did that for their places for eating tax, for instance.
I like that idea. I also would say that just the first establishment on this list in December made over $11,000, basically to have these 6 terminals sit in their back room. I think that $250 per terminal per year is a drop in the bucket. I have no problem with this.
I agree with Trustee Kaluzny. I think that's a great idea to use these funds directly towards something like beautification or things that make the community better or prettier, and something we can speak to, and I think it would go over well with the residents.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Okay, why don't we put this up for the February 14th meeting for board action, and if anybody has any further questions or comments, you could reach out to Doug or staff.
Thank you.
Okay, that ends the items we have up for discussion. Before we go into executive session, I'm going to open up the meeting again to public comment. Anybody on my left side have any public comment? Hearing none, anybody on the right side have any public comment? Okay, hearing no public comment, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session pursuant to Section 2C5 and 6, 5 ILCS 120/2- or parentheses C5 and 6, potential to lease or purchase property and/or discuss the sale of property owned by the village.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second, and there is no, just for anyone viewing this on the stream, there's no anticipated board action after the executive committee, so we would reconvene, but there would be no board action or discussion taken after we reconvene from executive session. So could I have a roll call on the motion to go into executive session?
Trustee Cote?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Conroy?
Aye.
Trustee Leclerc?
Aye.
Trustee Kalusny?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned into executive session at 7:55 PM. Thank you, everybody.
Are we doing it in here?